Walter was just an ordinary guy living a simple life as a dock worker. But one day, everything changed. Out of nowhere, a group of eagles started following him everywhere he went. It was the strangest thing. Why had they chosen him? Walter needed to find out. Was there something odd going on with their behavior? As much as Walter felt a little honored by the attention, he was also really confused. Eagles usually kept their distance from people, and they could even be aggressive. But these ones acted calm, almost friendly. They seemed to trust him. That didn't make sense. There had to be more to this. Walter felt like it was up to him to figure out what had caused this sudden change. The eagles started showing up at the docks every day, waiting to be fed. And out of all the workers, they always recognized Walter. But what happened next would leave him stunned. Walter made up his mind to try something no one else had dared to do with wild eagles. He knew it was risky. Their beaks were sharp and their wings were powerful. One wrong move and he could get hurt. But he also knew it was the only way to truly understand what was happening. Still, the question hung in the air. Why were these eagles so attached to him? Was there a deeper reason behind it? And what was he supposed to do about it? Walter had grown up in a quiet coastal village, surrounded by thick greenery and wildlife. As a kid, he was always drawn to nature. He'd spend hours outside, exploring the countryside and watching all kinds of birds. He felt a special connection to them. The way they moved so freely always inspired him. But his family didn't feel the same. They pushed him to choose something more practical. So, he trained to be a dock worker. He worked hard and eventually got promoted to foreman, managing the ships that came and went. Even with a packed schedule, Walter never lost that childhood love for nature. Whenever he could, he'd sneak in a quick break to watch the animals around the coast. People knew him for being kind-hearted, especially when it came to animals. Birds, in particular, always seemed to catch his attention. One day, while he was going about his usual tasks, Walter noticed something unusual. A lone eagle sitting on the edge of the dock. That didn't happen often. Eagles usually stayed far from people. So, of course, Walter was immediately curious. He decided to offer the eagle some food. The bird kept its distance at first, cautious and still. But eventually, it saw that Walter meant no harm. Slowly, it stepped closer and took the piece of meat from his hand. After eating it, the eagle took off and flew away, right away. Walter was happy he had helped the hungry bird, and after that, he didn't think too much about it. But the next morning, when he got to the dock, the eagle was there again, waiting for him. It had come back for more food, and Walter couldn't help but feel excited. He fed the eagle once more and spent a while just watching it. The way it moved, how it didn't seem afraid of him. It was fascinating. He never thought he'd connect with a wild animal like this. It felt like something out of a dream. Still, he couldn't help but wonder, why was the eagle acting this way? Couldn't it hunt on its own? Maybe something had happened to its home, and it needed help. Walter went home that night with all kinds of questions swirling around in his mind. He was glad the eagle trusted him, but he also started to worry. What if it couldn't survive out there anymore? The next day, Walter came back to the dock, fully expecting to see the eagle again, waiting for him like before. But to his surprise, it was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. He tried not to be too disappointed, but it was hard. He'd hoped they'd have more time together. Still, there was nothing he could do, so he got on with his usual work. Then, right around noon, just as he was about to take his lunch break, he heard a sound overhead, familiar and sharp. He looked up. The eagle was back, but this time it hadn't come alone. A whole group of eagles swooped down and landed near him, all looking at Walter with calm, expectant eyes. He was stunned. The first eagle had brought others. That simple gesture, bringing them to him, meant the world to Walter. He felt deeply moved, so he headed inside quickly to grab the bits of meat he'd stored in the freezer, just in case the eagle ever returned. But it wasn't nearly enough for the whole group. So he rushed out to the nearest store to get more. When Walter came back, a small crowd had gathered around the eagles. It was clear that other people found them just as special as he did. But instead of feeling happy about it, Walter felt uneasy. He was afraid the crowd might scare the birds off, and they'd never come back. So, in a moment he wasn't exactly proud of, Walter told the people the eagles were his trained pets, and that they were very sick. It wasn't the truth, and he knew it, but his plan worked. Some folks backed away, worried, and others left altogether. In the end, Walter was alone again with the eagles, which was all he really wanted. His lunch break was almost over, so he fed the birds quickly and figured they'd fly off once they were full. But they didn't. They stayed. Walter found this odd, but he didn't have time to think about it too much. He had to get back to work. Throughout the rest of the day, something unexpected happened. As Walter carried on with his tasks, he kept glancing over, expecting the birds to fly off at some point. But they never did. They just stayed there, watching him closely, as if they were waiting for something. Every time Walter stepped away, like when he had to go inside a ship, he'd come back out and see the eagles had moved too. They were now gathered near that same ship, like they were following him. It was a strange thing to see. Walter felt pretty special being followed like that, but deep down, he still felt uneasy. Why were they doing this? He had to get to the bottom of it, and maybe even help them if something was wrong. He had an idea, but it wasn't going to be easy. To make it work, he'd need a tiny camera, and he'd have to find a way to either catch an eagle or get one to trust him enough to attach it to its claw. So after work, Walter went to the store and bought as much raw meat as he could carry. That night, he laid it all out in a small pile in front of him, then sat completely still and waited. One by one, the eagles started walking toward him, drawn by the smell of the food. Walter's heart was pounding. Their beaks and claws were sharp, and one wrong move could end badly. But he stayed calm. He picked the eagle that was standing closest to him and slowly reached out to tie the camera around its claw. It was nerve-wracking, but he managed to do it. Then he gently backed away and connected the camera to his phone to check if it was working. To his relief, it was. When the eagles finished eating, they flew off again, full and satisfied. Walter felt proud of what he'd just pulled off. Now, with the camera, he might be able to see where they went and maybe learn why they weren't hunting for themselves anymore. That evening, Walter sat at his laptop, watching the live footage. The eagles were still flying, and from the look of it, they had traveled a long distance. Thankfully, the little camera also had a GPS tracker, so Walter could see exactly where they were heading. But then something happened that caught him completely off guard. He looked at the tracker, and his eyes widened. The eagles weren't flying out to the forest or toward the coast. They were circling right above his house. Walter stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. But when he checked the address on the tracker, it matched his own. He jumped up, rushed outside, and sure enough, there they were. As soon as the eagles saw him, they dove down and landed in his backyard. Walter was stunned. How did they know where he lived? He was almost certain they hadn't followed him home. He would have seen them. These birds were excellent hunters, sure, but this felt impossible. He stood there in disbelief, trying to understand what was happening. Now he was faced with a tough choice. He could call animal control and let the professionals handle it, but he had no idea what they might do with the eagles. And besides, that wouldn't answer any of his questions. In fact, this whole situation just made him more certain that food wasn't the only reason they were following him. If they were just coming for food, wouldn't they stay at the docks where he always fed them? Something else had to be going on. So Walter made a decision. He wouldn't call anyone. Instead, he came up with a new plan. He'd keep going about his regular day-to-day routine, but stop feeding the eagles completely. That way, he'd know for sure. If they kept coming, it wasn't just about the food. But the plan came with a risk. These were wild animals, strong, smart, and used to being fed by him. Walter knew things could get unpredictable fast. Walter didn't know how the eagles would react when he suddenly stopped giving them what they wanted, so he took a few extra steps to protect himself. For the next couple of days, he didn't leave the house without his Glock, though he only loaded it with blanks. He didn't want to hurt the birds, just scare them off if it came to that. He also had to make sure nobody at work saw him carrying it. Getting caught with a weapon could cost him his job. That night, the eagles stayed near his house again, and the next morning, Walter saw them flying along with him as he made his way to work. The GPS tracker confirmed it. They were right there, sticking close. Walter couldn't shake the nerves. This was the first day he wasn't going to feed them at all, and he was determined to follow through. But he also needed people to stay far away from him. He could handle the risk to himself, but if something happened to someone else, he'd never forgive himself. It turned out to be a long, stressful day. The eagles were around the whole time, just like usual. They didn't get upset, didn't act strange. They were calm as ever. But Walter still couldn't focus. He felt tense, constantly looking over his shoulder, expecting something to go wrong. He secretly hoped the eagles wouldn't follow him home again that night. But when he checked the tracker, he realized that hope was pointless. They had beaten him there. They were waiting near his front door when he walked up. Walter felt like their eyes were locked right onto him, almost like they were reading his thoughts. A part of him wanted to give in and just feed them, if only to ease the tension. But he knew he had to stick with his plan. The next few days played out almost exactly the same. Walter didn't feed them, but the eagles didn't leave. They kept showing up at the docks with him and waited outside his home afterward. And still, not a single sign of aggression. They were quiet, calm, and always watching. But then things at work took a turn. Walter's boss had finally had enough. The eagles were starting to get in the way, slowing down the busy flow of work, and people were complaining. Walter was given an ultimatum: either find a way to get rid of the birds or lose his job on the spot. Walter didn't know how to feel. Part of him was deeply sad. He'd built a strange kind of bond with these wild animals, and now he might never find out why they had chosen him in the first place. But at the same time, he felt a small wave of relief. Maybe this was the push he needed to finally break away from the whole thing. The next day, Walter came prepared. He brought his pistol and even asked a few coworkers to bring theirs too. The boss had made a one-time exception to the no firearms policy. This was the only way they saw to drive the eagles off for good. With a heavy heart, Walter and his colleagues pointed their guns toward the sky and began firing blanks. The moment the first shot rang out, the eagles jolted. They looked completely stunned, and within seconds they scattered in all directions, flying off as fast as they could. Walter was sure the scare had worked. They were probably too shaken to ever return. But what his boss didn't know was that Walter had never removed the tracker from one of the birds. That evening, when Walter got home, he didn't see a single eagle. The plan had clearly worked. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about them. Where had they gone? The first thing he did was check the tracker again. To his surprise, the signal was close, only about a 15-minute drive from his house. The location was pointing to a small, quiet-looking home. Had the eagles simply moved on to someone else after he scared them away? Walter knew he probably should have let it go, but he couldn't. He'd been through too much with them to just ignore this. So he got in his car and drove to the address. When he pulled up, he saw the eagles, scattered across the property, perched on the roof, the fence, and nearby trees. Something about the scene made his heart race. Walter stepped up and rang the doorbell, unsure of what to expect. A woman about his age opened the door. The second she saw him, her eyes went wide. She gasped, stumbled back, and looked like she was about to faint. Walter caught her just in time. After catching her breath, the woman began to explain the story Walter had been desperate to hear. The eagles had originally bonded with her late husband Danny. For almost a year, Danny had been feeding them daily. They followed him everywhere, home and to work. But 2 weeks ago, Danny had sadly passed away. Since then, the eagles had stayed near her house, even though she hadn't been feeding them. She was grieving and overwhelmed. Then, one day, they disappeared. Just like that. She figured one of them had spotted Walter somewhere, and the others had followed. And she understood exactly why. Walter looked exactly like her husband. When she first opened the door and saw him, she truly thought Danny had come back. Once the shock passed, she told Walter she was actually happy to see the birds again. She'd missed their presence and planned to start feeding them once more, hoping they'd stay. Walter still visits sometimes, just to see the birds. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps support the channel, and you never know who else might be moved by a story like this one.